Hey everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church weekly podcast. Conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Hey friends of Ephrata Community Church, we are thrilled to be with you. We're just easily thrilled guys, however, so we're pretty pumped. I'm glad to be here with Matt Swords.
Eagles won last night. So
I don't want to talk about it.
Speaking of being pumped, I am so pumped. What a game. What a game that was.
Whereas I am a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, and we lost to the Steelers.
Yeah, sorry to hear.
One of the only teams that
lost to the
Steelers. Anyway, all that to say, the pain is out. We just want to talk a little bit about the weekend.
But we're pumped for this conversation.
God was in our midst this weekend. As usual, it almost sounds cliche to say it, but we just saw wonderful things took place. Mm-hmm. Second in our series on You Ask For It, Kevin talking about God and evil. And if there is evil in the world, what's that say about God? And vice versa. Yeah. If there's a God in the world, what's it say about evil? Which is, I think, a better way to frame it. But before we dive into that, we've committed to something. In the last couple of weeks, the leadership of the community, pastors in particular, have been sitting and thinking, hey, we get to see the wonders that's happening at the moment with Word of Knowledge is being released, particularly for emotional and physical healing.
Yes.
Now, in the Harvest Net School of Ministry, we've been studying some of the supernatural gifts. And we find it interesting that not always in church history were words of knowledge used particularly around to release the fact that God wanted to do a particular healing. I love how different ways they've been used down through the ages.
Sure.
We don't have time to go into that. But at the moment, man, they are being used for God around emotional healing and encouragement and physical healing. So what we've decided to start to do is we want to start sharing with you some of the follow-up of the words that happen. We feel it's one of our responsibilities. We keep track of every word of knowledge we're given during the week from respected prophets and prophetesses, at the pre-service prayer, and then as many of you noticed, they start to flow in from the community during the service. Matt, you're one of the chief stewards of it. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I was privileged to serve as a service pastor this weekend, and you bring up a great point, and we're making purposeful steps to become better stewards of it, because I know for myself, you get the words that go in for the weekend, you share them, and then you kind of move on, and we've been putting it out to the prayer teams and, conversating as a team, what does it look like to steward these words better so we know, did they land? And if they did, what happened? And because we want to be good stewards at the end of the day. So,
well, do John Gibbon first. First of all, I think the testimony for the week is a perfect example.
Okay.
That we would not even have known that John's shoulder was healed.
Right.
If one of our pastors hadn't been sitting near him in the audience when the word was released and he reacted and we spotted him reacting and went up and talked to him, found out that he was healed. Am I making this up?
You're not making it up. The details are wrong, but you're not making it up.
That's why I pause. You ever get to that point where you're telling something, you hold it. Did I just conflate two stories? Anyway, go.
My face starts to contort when I sense deception in the air.
I'd like to think it was your face. I like to think it was the Holy Spirit saying to me, like, Jim, you've merged two stories.
Exactly.
Go.
No, it's fine. Actually, John was a contractor working and doing work on Dennis Scalise's house, which is fun. So you can ask Dennis for the actual story, but one of the people that John worked with goes to ECC. And so he was just like, hey, can I pray for you? And John wasn't attending ECC, so that was the connection. But then when we gave the word of knowledge, it was one of those, instead of saying, hey, come to the front and receive prayer, it was, here's a word. If that's you, put your hand in the air. We're going to pray right now. And so that's how it happened.
That's right.
And so John, as he tells the story, is one of those who put his hand in the air, and everybody swarmed around him and prayed. We prayed right there in the congregational, in the midst of our meeting. And then afterwards, he shared all the pain was gone after that prayer time, which is great. Obviously, really cool.
That's right. We get to see it there in the spot. So let's talk about some of the words that came this week.
So this weekend I have on my phone here a whole list of different words. I separated them out from Saturday night, and then answers that came that I'm mindful of right now. I did my best to write them in my phone right away. And then Sunday, same thing. But specifically, there was one word of knowledge that came yesterday. I'll share one specific one, where there was a person, I can't remember if she said woman, but I shared it as general, male or female, has a green shirt on, and she saw that the person who gave the word of knowledge shared with me. She said, I see a person sitting in ashes, and Jesus sitting with this person. And the communication was, what she felt in the vision was that Jesus is so patient, and he's happy to be with you in the ashes as long as you need him to be with you in there. He's not rushing you along. He's not forcing he's not zapping you to say, get out of there. I'm sick of it. Like, I'm tired. Let's move on.
How long are you going to do this?
Yeah, he's so patient with you in this. In ashes representing difficulty, loss, despair. Anyway, so I shared that from the front.
I thought you were just going to stop there.
No, that was it.
Dramatic pause.
Yeah. Do you like that? The power of the pause? So I shared that. And then I had the privilege of meeting the woman that came to the front who had a gray sweater on, which, if you're following the story, was not green. But she was showing her story, and she said, for the past, my memory serves me right, for the past few days and weeks, I've been dwelling on passages in the Old Testament that have to do with people in ashes, and just the idea of dwelling in ashes and things like that. And then she said, and this morning I was debating on what shirt I wanted to wear, and she had a green shirt underneath her sweater, and she said, and at the very last minute, I chose to wear green. And I'm like, man, not only are you wearing green, and because people can what's the word? People can emotionally attach to a word and say, you know what, I feel like that's God speaking to me. Mm-hmm. And it's great and beautiful. And then there's this person who says, I've been dwelling on passages having to do with ashes because of what she was going through. Like, this was such a tailor-made word for her, to let her know Jesus is with you and we'd love to pray for you. Mm-hmm. So she said, could you pray for me? And it was beautiful.
Oh, dude, that's gorgeous.
It was awesome.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah. And it was her first time here, first time at Ephrata Community Church.
Did you ever wonder if someone will probably come back again?
I don't know, but I'm pretty pumped that her first experience was God saying, I see you and I'm with you.
Yeah. But because I also want her long-term, what I want is where I get excited. Like a year from now, I want her to be like, oh yeah, that was the experience that brought me into a community that brought further healing. I mean, just like when Jesus is sitting there, the 72 come back and they're so excited, even the demons obey us. Mm-hmm. And Jesus goes, that's awesome. But guess what? Your name's
written in heaven.
In heaven. I speak that over that woman. I hope that she finds that she's part of a community.
Yeah, and I mean, John's experience, the testimony we heard, his connection, his healing experience was like, where did that guy to go to church? He goes to ECC. I'm going to check it out, and here he is. We have people that their first time in the building was our prophetic weekend we put on each year. So they heard about it, and they were thinking, I'm going to show up, and they get ministered to deeply by the Holy Spirit through our prophetic teams, and then now they're part of our body here.
It just reminds me of the Apostle John when he wrote his gospel. He only records 7 of Jesus' miracles, right? And he refers to them all as signs, so that you might believe. Mm-hmm. And I just love that. That I long to see the signs and wonders in our midst, so that Jesus' name can be lifted up and people believe. That gets me pretty excited.
Yeah. And as we continue, one last thing I want to say on this, as we release different words, and I think I have probably 15 here total spoken through the weekend, and we're starting to get feedback through the week. And then you wonder, what about this one or that one? And what happened this past weekend was a person responded to a word that I shared 3 or 4 weeks ago. Yeah. And this person comes to the front and said, hey, 4 weeks ago, this word of knowledge was shared and I didn't respond, but here I am and I'm responding now.
Yeah, before I share a little more, or we dive a little more into how we're stewarding this move of the Spirit among us. And I mean that, I don't use that lightly. If you would have been part of this community in the 90s, matter of fact, there's whole newspaper articles about it, the move of the Spirit was characterized by baptism in the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. Now, it had so many other things going on, but if you would have been looking at it kind of objectively from the outside, you say there's something's going on around the baptism of the Holy Spirit.
Sure.
Now, if you come to this community, you have to start to admit, wow, there's something going on around words of knowledge unto healing. Mm-hmm. That's a different kind of movement of the Spirit, right? The Spirit is so wonderful and multifaceted. And so I'm just wondering, is there any others you would want to share before we dive into that might have even happened over the last few weeks. I want to talk a little bit about how we're stewarding these words.
Any other specific words?
Yeah. Any of them? You can just say no, and we'll dive into the next part of this chat.
Well, just in brief, there's also this. It's not a one size fits all as it relates to these words, right? So it's not like there's one way we go about sharing it. Although the majority of them will show up at the end of the service. Hey, here are specific things. But yesterday, for example, there was about 5 different people that came during worship and shared the same, categorically the same thing with different nuanced language. And then the last one was Wayne Kaufman. If you're not familiar, Wayne is a trusted prophet who is part of our body here and travels around the world ministering out of the prophetic gift and office that God has called him to. We respect and honor him here in that regard. And so he comes to the front and then just says the same thing. And so I looked at Wayne and said, can you minister that from the front? So after worship during the transition time, I kind of just invited us as a body to say, hey, we're going to take time to pray into this specific thing. Invited Wayne to the front. And it had to do with people who are just feeling beat up. Hebrews 12:12, I think it is. Strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble. The Lord wanted to minister strength and peace to his people, to the church. And Wayne was ministering out of that. We had people raise their hands. We, just like John's testimony, we gathered around people in the house and prayed. And it was so, man, I just love those moments because they're like, we had all these things planned and we're excited to deliver on what we've scheduled. Mm-hmm. God's in those things. And he's also in this moment right now, which we're going to give him room for. And then we're going to minister to this thing. You came here this morning not realizing that God highlighted this for you. It's really cool.
Can I tell a story?
Sharing? Yeah, please.
Come on. So I'm helping to steward the HarvestNet School of Ministry, and as some of you may know, we're in the midst of our spiritual gifts intensive. And Saturday, we meet every Tuesday night, and then the third Saturday of every month. And it was the third Saturday, so we were together. And our speaker who was coming in, Mark Calkins, during prayer that week, had felt very clearly that there was going to be a corporate word released, actually a prophecy, over the group around women in ministry. But he felt very clearly from the Lord, you do not bring it up till I make the move in the room, right? So that's always an interesting thing. So Mark said it's pretty weird when you're trying to prep for a teaching and you're not allowed to bring up your material, right? In other words, or your spiritual prep for this. Now, we start the day off talking about words of wisdom and how they're different from words of knowledge and prophecy. And if you ever want to know more, we're happy to chat with you. But a word of wisdom is when something ends up happening in the room that completely changes the tone. You might be sitting trying to make a decision around something. All of a sudden, someone shares something that everyone in the room's like, let's start talking about it from that angle because there's something there. Yep. Sure enough, in the room, all of a sudden, one woman who claims she has never commented to this line of talk before publicly decides that she wants to bring up an experience she had. And she says, and she began to share about it. I won't go into any detail now.
Sure.
And I mean, in that moment, you could sense in the room, Mark and I, 2 different spots in the room, both sense that that's the way in. And naturally, she's bringing up about her being released as a woman to be who she's meant to be. Mm-hmm. And man, we just paused and started to minister around that. And what the Lord did was so powerful, right? So there's another one of the examples of and I won't even go into some other people in the room, but we're also having some things around the topic of women in ministry and women being fully released and stuff. So the Lord is clearly up to something. And it was amazing what happened in the room around a very delicate conversation. A spirit of availability and humility was released because the Lord decided to introduce it through a sign and a wonder. It really was a wonder. I can't go into, we were all just sitting there amazed at what took place next when we brought this person up and began to pray over them. But all that to say, it brought such humility for that conversation. So we spent an hour and a half sitting down on praying over people and seeing the Spirit move around this particular topic. So again, so excited about what the Lord's releasing so that we are learning more, growing more, and going to be a more amazing community. So I
love that story. I think that I didn't know. I heard from you some of the details, but that's amazing. I love that.
How it happened. Yeah, so I have to say, and it's so funny, we had just done a lecture the previous Tuesday night on the difference between a word of wisdom hitting a room over and against the word of knowledge and prophecy, and then to actually see it happen. And none of us were, like afterwards, I even took a time as a teacher and I said, hey, can we all just talk for a little bit about what just happened there to learn from it as we all lead in the future? It was just a great moment. Now, let me pause there, though. We could go on and on. We just want to remind you, we are committed to begin talking in this community about what's going on in the area of words of knowledge so that we can be a community that have our own faith and trust raised. But also, we want to see this at work in our community so that Jesus' name is lifted and that people are drawn to him. And I love that our first two stories we told where people were drawn because they saw something God was doing. Yeah. And that is something that gets us excited around here. Now, just want to remind you a little bit about behind the scenes here, what takes place. Every weekend on Sunday afternoon, an email is sent to every member that was on the prayer teams and all of the pastors, and it is a survey who responded to words of knowledge. So we want you to know that we actually have a method where we gather every weekend the stories of what people were coming forward and whether they identified as one of the words of knowledge. And then we have the person who prayed over them record what took place. So we want to admit, I'm not making up numbers here like 30, 30, 30 or 33, 33, 33. We don't know that. We haven't gathered and tracked that enough. Right. We respect ministries that do, and we're attempting to do our best efforts. But we are seeing every week significant numbers of healing, emotional and physical. We are seeing almost every week someone coming up with a word of knowledge that was previously spoken from weeks before, like they had to sit in it. And then, of course, we have some that are still question marks. We want you to know we track those where we had no one respond. Like the other week, there was a woman's name around something, and we are still like, is that person responding? Is that person in our online community? We're asking ourselves our own questions about these words of knowledge, but we share it with you to let you know a little bit of what goes on.
Yeah, and the only way we're going to get better at this is if we are purposeful to examine them and analyze, was this right or wrong? Because if it was wrong, if wrong's not the right word, if it was correct or if we need to...
Deficient. Yeah. I mean, deficient is not wrong.
It's and we're all growing. We're all in varying degrees of the discernment spectrum and growing in regard to that. And so the only way I can know that the impression I get, let me say it this way, a common experience, 90% of the people will have this experience. Well, an impression will come to mind. Then there's the, how do I know this is not God, this is God, or this isn't myself? Like, how can I be confident to say, I believe God is wanting to do this? That right there is able to keep a huge population of people from stepping forward to share the word. And those that do share, it's not even guaranteed that it's accurate, right? Because we don't necessarily know without stepping out and giving it a shot. And we have testimonies. The reason we share testimonies is to encourage people. This happens. This works. Green shirt, sitting in ashes, and it's just like, wow, like you couldn't have made that up. And for a person to say, that's me, and then all of a sudden, and a first-time guest, how many first-time guests are going up to the front saying, can you pray for me in regards to the despair I'm carrying? Like, first-time guests will hear this person, even if they just happen to be here because a cousin invited them or they're here for their niece's baby dedication. Jesus still sees them right where they're at. So we want to steward these well so as to share them and let people, build courage for people to step out and say, go for it.
That's right.
Because you don't know unless you give it a shot. And this is such a grace-filled community that you're going to be given another opportunity. Just keep going.
No judgment zone. Yeah, be gentle with yourselves. We all know that we're learning. Yeah. Now, hey, you just heard us talk a little bit about the ministry of the Spirit supernaturally in our midst. The ministry of the Word took place as well. It was wonderful. As you can tell, we're not going to dive into it. We are considering whether together. We're going to do some special recordings around some of these questions that are coming up. We know that we're diving into some You Ask For It series questions that are a little bit more intense, etc. And we just want to give you a heads up that we might be taking some special time to record some stuff that goes a little bit deeper into questions that you just can't cover in 35 minutes from the front. So
I want to go into that word of wisdom stuff right now.
Oh, dude, trust me, it's pretty fun.
It's so fun.
Anyway, we like you.
Yes.
Remember, you're above average and probably further above than you think.
That was really encouraging, Jim.
I know, brother.
Gift of encouragement here. Thanks for being with us today. We'll look forward to being with you again next week.
That's right.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening and that you'll join us again next week. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us by visiting EphphatACommunityChurch.com.